So let's delve in with Brooklyn, starting with Durant's foot on the line and just how this team has retooled
Rip
and
that
just
Band-Aid off.
yeah,
Charlotte's
right.
in pain.
I mean, I don't feel guilty because you're all going to be the favorite to win the title. So I mean, you guys would be right in
That's fair.
contention. So I don't feel too bad about that, to be honest. But just what is your feeling, Nick, in terms of how the vibe of this team's going to be headed into this season? Because Matt and I have talked about kind of the villain narrative. Because Matt, followed that Miami Heat team pretty closely with LeBron, Bosh, and Wade, and they got like tons of just hate and vitriol. And I felt like with Brooklyn last year, just due to all the circumstances, they kind of were able to somewhat sidestep that compared to the Heat. So coming into this season, do you feel like they're going to get that kind of Miami Heat wave of this all that? I don't know, just hate online, or do you think they might sidestep that? Like, how do you feel the team is going to deal with, having fans back into the stands, having to go into opposing teams' arena with every team gunning for them, not only the players, but just, those fans as well, because they're going to be the attraction when they're playing inferior teams. So what's kind of the vibe of, this year's, Nets headed into the season?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hatred for the Nets. They don't have the most popular players. Obviously, we have Kyrie with all the news and different things along those lines. And obviously, if he doesn't play, maybe we're talking about something completely different. But in the scenario that he does play and this team is fully healthy, I think they're going to have a really dominant season. And people are just going to hate them because you're just going to have other guys like coming off the bench and even popping off a little bit. Patty Mills is going to have big moments. You're going to have LaMarcus Aldridge, who came out of retirement, probably have some good games. We saw a lot of backlash with Blake Griffin last year after he's bought out with the Pistons, signs with the Nets, has multiple dunks in a few games. People are kind of flipping out on the internet. So I think if the Nets are healthy and dominant, there's going to be a lot of hatred. Obviously, KD's not well liked, best player in the league, and people still won't forget about Golden State. And obviously, James Harden kind of, trying to find a way to get to the free throw line. People never really loved that. So definitely think the three stars alone kind of had their own, trolls and hatred behind them. And then I think, the group being together and, possibly being, easily the best team in the league if healthy, I think that just kind of brings negative energy because people are honestly jealous to an extent. And then also just like getting that much talent in one place, it kind of almost makes it unfair if everything works out right.
Wouldn't you say too, I mean, with the stars listed on that roster and even the guys who are now somewhat role players, I mean, they're kind of the perfect team in many ways. They've dealt with so much criticism on teams they've been with in the past. I mean, Kyrie wasn't super well liked in Cleveland towards the end there with butting heads with LeBron and things like that, controversy surrounding that. KD, you mentioned Blake Griffin wasn't liked on the Clippers by the end there.
Yep.
I mean, I think it is a pretty battle-tested roster. And really, I mean, I guess the exception is arguably their MVP last year, although you could certainly say KD, but James Harden, who has the most to prove. I wanted to dive into the foundation of the Nets because you are so connected with the stories of that organization. Can you take us just like, we don't have to go super in detail here, but from the like KG, Paul Pierce, getting off of that team, Russian owner, etc., Prokhorov, to hitting the reset button and doing this in a smart way? How have they been able to do that? And then later on, shift gears into now we're loaded.
Yeah, I mean, credit to Sean Marks. He took over this team and he had no young assets. He had no draft picks. He had no cap space. And he was able to turn it into the team it is now. And he did that by just consistently making smart moves, taking small risk here and there. But it was really like, okay, Spencer Dinwiddie, a guy who had a lot of potential coming out of college, was coming off a torn ACL in the draft, was dropped by Chicago and Detroit. Let's try him out, see what he can do. We're going to envision, put some confidence in this guy. And honestly, also, I got to throw in Kenny Atkinson because he was so great at player development, getting the best out of some of these players that other teams kind of toss to the side. Same thing with Joe Harris. He was a first-round pick by Cleveland. They picked him up, turned him into one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. Even a guy like Karis LeVert, coming into the draft, had the broken foot multiple times at Michigan. A lot of teams were kind of scared to draft him. Nets took the risk. They got him. He turned into a good player, kind of helped push them there. D'Angelo Russell, another guy you look at, kind of tossed to the side by LA, given that whole Nick Young incident, came to Brooklyn, was able to kind of flourished under Kenny Atkinson, unlocking different things. And I think a lot too is just like the culture of the Nets. Like Sean Marks is coming here and he's really made them a respected organization. And I'll be honest, after the KG and Pierce trade and all that, they were pretty much a joke. They were laughing stock of the league. They were losing every year. They didn't have a top pick. So you're looking at it like, oh, damn, like, do I even want to take this job if you're Sean Marks? Sean Marks takes the job, doesn't, amazing things. And another thing he did right from the start that I thought was very important was he realized that the Nets are not going to be able to have the best players, like right off rip. We don't have the draft picks. We don't have the cap space. We don't have the attraction to sign those free agents. But what we're going to do is we're going to make our organization top class in every possible way. We're going to have the best training facility in Brooklyn, no commute. You get to see the Manhattan skyline, the rooftop, a ton of crazy stuff, even the medical staff. They have staff on their team, not only for like fitness, wellness, your diet and all that things. They have a guy on their staff that literally tells you like when to sleep, how much you should sleep and things along those lines. So they're taking the details of different things and trying to like push these players as far as they can in any way they possibly can. So credit to ownership too, because they weren't short on spending the money and trying to push the Nets to the top in the best way they could. And also another thing they really did, and this kind of caught NBA circles, and this is a big reason why I think, KD and Kyrie signed with the Nets, is they treated their players really, really well. And not just their players, also their family. There's like a spot in Barclays Center just for family members when they come to the game, make sure everything is super easy for you. And players really appreciate that, especially with other organizations in the league kind of being cheap or not necessarily showing players respect. You see the Nets, they're like, okay, we understand what we need to do. This is a players' league. And I think Sean Marks was a little bit ahead of the curve. And that's a big reason they're in the spot they're in.
Yeah, it seems so simple in hindsight, given the social media personalities that many of these players are. They're looking to build their own brands. They're in some cases very individualistic in that way. They are their own businesses, and they've kind of built the facilities there, it sounds like, for them to expand that and be the most successful version of that. How did word spread of that? I mean, was it simply like word of mouth of how well these players were being treated? What have you heard about that?
Yeah, I think it's really just word of mouth. I think players know, even coming to the facility as an opposing team, like, oh, Barclays Center is nice. This is in Brooklyn. And, I'm not trying to throw shade at the Knicks, but James Dolan obviously has all those incidents with former players, not necessarily known for treating his players the best. Okay, I want to go play in a big city. I want to play in New York. The Nets are going to treat me right. They're doing some good things with these young pieces. All right, this is really attractive here. So I think word of mouth, and also Sean Marks is a clever guy. He's done some like low key things with player agents to just kind of get guys extra money, be it an extra guarantee on his contract, even though he's going to get cut at training camp. Those type of things always rub guys the right way, or even buying players out right off rip. When Sean Marks took over, I believe he bought out Joe Johnson pretty early in the scenario, just kind of doing anything he can to get in the good graces of players and agents. I thought that was really important and something that kind of was low key and people didn't really talk about because they were smaller moves. But when it comes to the bigger picture, those things matter, especially to the big names in the NBA.
It's just such an interesting juxtaposition with, you mentioned, the Knicks being there. And I mean, Madison Square Garden is awesome, but it is dated. It brings to mind like the Nets have built this prestige level akin to, I would say, like the 90s Yankees. Like it was always a baseball player's goal, like, when they hit their prime, take like Jason Giambi, take eventually Johnny Damon. Like, you want to land with the Yankees because that is that landmark franchise. And I think it's just brilliant the way this is where I really respect the Nets. I may say some negative things from time to time, but in terms of a franchise, I mean, it's just a brilliant example of building that prestige level in a league with a hard cap.
Yeah, I mean, credit to them and Sean Marks and just the mindset he had. And like I said, he's controlled, but at the same time, he's willing to make some aggressive moves here and there and not scared to ruffle some feathers. I mean, early on, he threw out these crazy offer sheets at some free agents that probably didn't deserve them, and that definitely upset some teams. Pat Riley wasn't happy with the one for Tyler Johnson. They weren't happy with the one in Portland with Alan Crabb, and even Washington with Otto Porter. Like, there are moves that kind of upset some people. Sean Marks didn't really care. He's like, all right, people don't really do this. I don't care. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try to push this team to the next level in any way I can. So, I think the willingness from ownership and then Sean Marks willing to be creative and aggressive in different ways has really pushed this franchise forward. So And also, they have a lot of former staffers from San Antonio, Sean Marks being one of them. So trying to build some of that mindset, but also being a little bit more modern than the San Antonio Spurs franchise. No disrespect to them, obviously one of the greatest franchises in NBA history, but still, I think they've kind of lost touch maybe a little bit over the last couple of years, and they surely can get it back. But I think the Nets kind of just did what they did and then maybe altered it just to be more current and more player based.